welcome everybody to the first Sunday night edition of the My Generation podcast, a shorter, sweeter, more informal episode of the show where it's just me and you talking about something I'm interested in sharing, whether it's a film review, whether it's a personal anecdote from my life, or a story you want me to talk about here on the show. Every single Sunday evening we'll be doing a slightly different episode, a little bit more uncut. I'll be sharing a story. And today I thought, what better place to start than with my favourite film of all time. It's The Fountain, 2006 film by Darren Aronofsky. He was also the writer of the screenplay. It stars Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz as Tommy and Izzi. And it's the story of Tommy, who is he's a modern day scientist, and he struggles with the idea of mortality. And his wife Izzi is someone who's more come to terms with death, and she's been struck by a serious illness, and it's how Tommy sort of copes with that. She is writing a book, Izzi, called The Fountain. You explore the Spanish conquistador character within Izzi's book, who is also played by Hugh Jackman, and who is going to try and achieve eternal life to save Spain from dying. And you also explore a future version of Tommy. He hasn't really got an official name. Some call him Astro Tom, because he's going through space to try and reach Xibalba, a dying star, which is a recurring element within the other two stories as well. Under IMDb it comes under as a drama, mystery, romance, but I think it is so much more. And in this slightly shorter than a typical episode of the show, but longer than a regular review, I'm going to be talking about why The Fountain to me is just my favourite film ever. And there's yet to be a movie that has hit me in the same way that The Fountain has. And the first part of that is due to its rewatchability. I've seen the movie 7 times, and I've gained something new from it every single time. I think it takes a few viewings to get everything you want from the film, which is why I don't think it did too well critically or financially. It was a bit of a flop for both, but it's actually gained a bit of a cult following. It has its own graphic novel as well, which mirrors the plot, but has some different elements as well. The graphic novel was a really interesting read in its own way. The art style was really, really striking because it wasn't pretty the whole way through. And he does some interesting stuff with the characters in a different way. But sort of bringing it back to the movie and why you get so much out of rewatching it is because of what it makes you consider about life itself. Hugh Jackman's character of Tommy really struggles with the idea of letting go of things, letting go of his wife who's slowly dying, letting go of there's a monkey called Donovan, which he is also trying to save. There's toward the start of the movie, there's a miraculous divine intervention type moment where Donovan seemingly is getting better, but because he's still got a tumour that Tommy's trying to cure, he's not seeing that as a success. He's driven just by stopping things from dying. I love Aronofsky's protagonists in all of his movies because they all share an obsession. They're all obsessed with something, and in this case, it's about one of the truest things to human and all of life in general. It's a fear of a loss of a life, a fear that you can't stop things dying, and that there's seemingly no purpose to life itself. But then he's so beautifully reflected in Izzi's character, who is accepting of death as she is starting to come to terms with what is happening to her. And the way that they're both learning from each other, and how the 3 stories interweave. My explanation at the start was a bit clumsy of the 3 different narratives, the past, present, and future almost, because it's hard to describe in words, which is why this works so well as a film, because the 3 stories weave into each other, and it's very allegorical. You can sort of choose which stories you think are real, which ones are an allegory. I have my own theories, and I'll be getting to them sort of at the end of this podcast episode, exactly what I think the film actually means overall. But going through also, it's not just a movie about life and death, but it paints it all in such a beautiful light. It's a heavenly experience, but not just necessarily in a religious way. I'm not particularly religious, but the film does cultivate beautiful imagery, and the whole way through, it's just trying to be a positive source and turn a subject that can be quite a difficult one, like death, into something that's quite positive. And that's one key message that I think makes this movie stand out so much, is about how something that so many people can quite rightly fear is actually something to be seen as quite beautiful, and something to embrace. But that, you strive through life and you do what you do, but that at the same time, death creates new life. But it's the way it also shows that. It doesn't just sort of talk about it. It shows it through trees are a very big allegory within the movie, and you see it across the three timelines, because the version of Tom that's heading to space to try and get to the dying star, he's got a tree within his sort of spaceship. Aronofsky calls it a spaceship, but it's just a sort of a ball floating up through the sky, a clear ball, and sort of what that tree means to him and why it's there is also up for debate, as to why he's traveling with this, but also the importance of that specific tree. Again, I'll be getting into all the spoilers at the end. It's also the language that the film uses as well, the conversations and the performance. There are a couple of really beautiful moments early on where Tom merges between sort of the future version into the current present day one, within a single conversation. And some of the conversations he has with Izzi, and the performance from Hugh Jackman is just incredible. The way he's able to capture a man who is clearly struggling with the idea of letting anything go. And I think it's something that what it touches on in the movie is relatable to everyone. The idea of struggling to let go of something, and it doesn't even have to be the subject of life and death. It can be anything. It can be letting go of a past relationship. It can be letting go of a memory from the past, something to do with school or work. These are all very transferable things, and it just explores it within one of the most powerful, sort of biggest things that people will come to in life. And he's struggling to let go of the fact that things die and new things are born. He's very stuck in that. And the way Hugh Jackman gets that across in his performance is just masterful. And the reason why the language is so important is because sort of the conquistador story that Izzy's writing about the dying star, is the words are very poetic. She's sort of using this as almost like a therapy to write through her thoughts and feelings, how she's coming to terms with mortality and what that is. She has a few moments as well throughout that sort of push her towards it, but she's by no means a perfect character, because at the same time she sort of starts off quite scared as well. Some stuff she doesn't quite help Tommy sort of deal with, but her character art throughout the movie is absolutely beautiful. I just again want to bring it to the sound design, sort of leading on from dialogue. The music, the score is absolutely one of the most beautiful things I've heard. I mean, I listen to the music all the time. It's one of those kind of soundtracks that you can always listen back to. It's a Clint Mansell soundtrack, and it's just so calming. But it knows when to build to the intense moments, and toward the end, there's a moment with the music sort of climaxes, and you've never felt so full, and then it stops for a moment, and it just lets you breathe and take in the whole film. It feels like you're being hit by the weight of everything you've just heard in one go. But these are sort of moments that are very difficult to take in on your first viewing, because you're just trying to understand all that's going on. But there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of interesting shapes and moments that go by without you realizing. A lot of lighting choices. So the sort of queen character within the conquistador story is of the past is sort of bathed in light quite a lot, showed sort of like a very godlike character as they're sort of searching for immortality. And and why they are. The sort of future Tom is one of the most interesting to me, because his mission isn't initially very clear, and you sort of wonder, why is he heading to this dying star, and how it ties into the middle present day story. I'm now going to get into spoilers for The Fountain, so I would encourage you to click off this podcast and go away and watch the whole film at least once, maybe even twice, before coming back here, because there are so many things that I now want to talk about relating to what I think the movie means, or my interpretation at least of the film. So starting with what I think the movie, the plot lines and how I think they link. So I believe that the Conquistador story is indeed a book written by Izzi, and we are seeing the physical manifestation of her story. And I believe that the future one is the same Tom from the middle story. So I think that present day Tom, after the death of his wife, did indeed go on to discover immortality. And once he did that, the tree that Izzi was buried beneath, he built his spaceship around that tree. So effectively Izzi is the tree, and set off on a journey to take her to the dying star, because he's an immortal person, meaning that he can infinitely travel, and probably spent thousands and thousands of years alone traveling to the dying star of Xibalba, so that when it explodes, Izzi and himself together become the birth of an entirely new galaxy. They have the biggest reincarnation of the story, and sort of present day Tom realized that that's what he needed to do, because he couldn't do anything more with his immortality, and the tree and Tom get absorbed up into a dying star, which means that they're becoming a big part of it. And Izzy's story obviously ending on the Conquistador getting sort of overwhelmed with the idea of keeping his mortality. I think it's a very poignant that that he thought that eternal life would be gained because he would drink from the tree of life, but instead of giving him permanent eternal life, it obviously just meant that he was engulfed into the tree and became part of it, which is just a little sort of tease as to what is to come with Izzi and Tommy very shortly after in the next moment. And that his death was quite painful, because he had a version of immortality that didn't line up with the one he was about to become. But despite the fact that his death was painful, it's still beautiful at the same time, because he's finally can rest, and has allowed the tree of life to continue to grow, and has contributed to a part of nature, so becoming a part of the tree. Izzy has a great line within the piece about how she's becoming, how when, if you bury someone and then plant a tree in them, then they become a part of the tree, and then once a bird comes onto the tree, you then fly with the birds, and I think that's incredibly beautiful, and that's what the Conquistador gets, and the middle Tommy doesn't really realize initially what it's meant to be, but to be immortal, or to live forever. But because I imagine that he does eventually achieve real immortality with Donovan, and then goes on to then have countless years to figure out what the true meaning of immortality is and eternal life, and the best process for him, that he decides to take that tree and go to Xibalba, because he would have had a lot of time to think about it. And can you imagine having a couple, probably hundreds of thousands of years to think about life? And that's something that I only sort of gained from my fourth or fifth viewing of the film. Again, that's what I mean about how the viewings of the film inform you, and the different scenes and what they mean. That's what the ending of it means to me. And the reason we see Izzy so prominently in the future scenes is they're his memories of her from the past to me. And now there's a lot of different interpretations of the film. One could argue that all three are real stories, and the future Tom saving the Conquistador from death so that he could reach the tree of life. They're sort of bleeding into each other. But remember, Izzy asked Tommy to write the end of the story, and he's almost written his future self into it as a savior for the Conquistador to get him to the tree of life. So I imagine that last chapter, everything from when he's about to be struck down onwards is all written by Tommy during his immortal phase, and he finished the book, and that's how he saw it best to finish. He finishes with his own character being engulfed by a tree, in the same way that Izzy in real life was, but in a much less painful way. I imagine that Tommy saw that the character would struggle with this, but all three characters eventually are absorbed by nature. All three versions of Tommy, or in my theory's case too, because some people do believe that they are also separate, and I can also fully appreciate the other variants that people think that this movie has, because Aronofsky was not clear, and I like that because it means you have so much time and place to think. Each of the stories also have their own visual stimulus and imagery, so lots of pure circles, spherical shapes in the future story, lots of squares, very box shapes in the middle one to show Tommy's more in a box, and then sort of triangular shapes in the sort of past story. And you can take from the sort of meaning of those as you wish. They're very, very unclear, but very deliberately unclear. And I think that's what makes this movie so beautiful, along with the very cultivating soundtrack that's very mystical, the lighting, the beauty of all of it. And that's why I think that it paints the idea of mortality in such a beautiful way. The idea that, you know, when you pass, you just get sort of absorbed back into the infinite everything, and you become one with it. You're not just a small part in a massive machine. That is life, that is existence. You kind of just become a whole of it. And these sort of questions and things I hadn't really considered until I had watched this film, and then it just opened all those things up for me. I mean, Tom, one of his first lines is "Let us finish it." He's attempting to finish something. There's a whole lot about what finishing something is. Getting to the end. There's a lot about ending in this and why things end and what is an ending. I mean, I'm a filmmaker by trade, and we sort of in the trade think that nothing really ever ends a project. You just release a version, but it can infinitely grow. The only thing that can end it is a deadline. The project can always be malleable and changed, and I think that's, for me, another thing that resonated, that what really is an ending to something, and this allowed me in my own life to think about things from my past and what they mean, why they ended, why certain new things grew from them, and I look at things that have faded away in my life and how that without them sort of disappearing, new really great things would not have arisen. And I think that allows every sort of ending to a chapter of life to be that much more beautiful, no matter how painful or painless it is, which is why I love this film so much, because of the message it discusses and the way that it is so beautiful. So I would really like in the comments below for you to comment on what you think about The Fountain. I love it so much. At this point with the show, I just really want to get conversations going, people talking about these kind of things. If they're interesting to you, let me know if this interested you, if it introduced you to a movie that you hadn't heard of before, or if you had seen The Fountain, maybe it painted it in a different light for you. I just sort of went over my theory of the film, why I enjoy it. I can appreciate it's got some flaws. It is quite confusing at the start, and I think it loses a little bit in its own confusion and gets bogged down in its own understanding of what's going on, but not really helping you as a viewer. But I'm going to be watching it again in a couple of days. It'll be my 8th time watching the film with a couple of mates who haven't seen it before. Very excited to hear what they think of it when I show them. I've had some really great experiences watching this film. I've watched it with some really great people, and then afterwards I always want to talk to them about it. I've watched it a couple times, obviously on my own as well, and every time I do, I get something else, because there's so much happening in each moment and there's so much to consider from each bit, and that's why it's my favourite film, because it takes so much advantage of what makes film great. having 3 different storylines that blend into each other and discussing one of the biggest issues, having a soundtrack but also taking advantage of incredible lighting where it's also bright and vivid. Also, I think they use petri dishes to have like little macro science experiments that were then made into what Xibalba was, the dying star. Making the most of that. Beautiful performances that went through both poetic and realistic stages. It has everything to me. And it was just such a shame that not enough people saw it. I know that this isn't going to be everyone's favourite film. It's a real thinker. You have to sit down and watch it. It's not a casual viewing experience. But if you like a movie that makes you think, The Fountain's the one for you. I'm very excited to talk more about film, to talk more about other things I love. And actually on the podcast coming up in the next few weeks, we are very film heavy actually. I addressed this when I've spoken to Emma and in my playwright episode that's also coming up, just about how much film stuff we've got coming up, which is really cool. I'm going to be talking with, on Thursday's episode of the show, Owen Laws. He is a filmmaker based in the sort of southeast area. We're talking about a film he made called Oddity. He's going to be talking about what it was like to make that film here on the show, obviously with music from a local Kent artist as well, because Sunday edition of the show won't be featuring local music or Sammy's music reviews. They'll be kept weekly to Thursday's episodes. This is obviously also the first Sunday night episode of the podcast, so let me know if you've enjoyed it, because it's something a little bit different. And then every Sunday night it'll just be me and you talking about a film, a passion, an anecdote from life, a story. If there's something you just want me to talk about on my own, leave it in the comments. If there's an experience, something you want me to elaborate on that you maybe heard me mention in a previous episode, that's what the Sunday night show is going to be. And then every Thursday from 6 p.m, you'll have a podcast guest, a music recommendation from Sammy, and then a local Kent artist. We've got Owen coming up about his film. Alex Durham, who's a freelance filmmaker, she'll be talking about what life is like doing freelance filmmaking, as well as Alex Merritt, who is talking about some of his favourite films as well. And Dan Feekins, he'll be talking about some, like this film is, hidden gems. And obviously I'm having Connor Jenkins, he's coming back on the show, don't forget. He's going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to play an episode live on the My Generation podcast, so stay tuned for that, and so much more. Thank you all very much for listening to this first Sunday night special of the My Generation podcast. It's been a lot of fun to make, and just bring something a little bit different to the show. If you want to keep seeing these every Sunday evening at 6, leave a like on this and and subscribe as well, and turn on post notifications so I know that this is a type of episode that you really enjoy to see. And I'll aim to bring more of them every single Sunday evening. I've got a couple of really nice ones in the pipeline, talking about my playwriting, the creation of a radio drama, why I do my freelance filmmaking, also about some of my other hobbies and things I've read. So super excited to talk about that. Thank you all very much for listening once again, and we'll tune in with you Thursday for the brand new episode of the My Generation podcast, which will be obviously a longer form episode, as well as these Sunday night ones are going to be a bit shorter as well in places. So yeah, comment below, let me know what you think, and we'll tune in with you on Thursday for Owen's episode, where he's talking about his film Oddity with Sammy Bacon's music recommendations and music from Love Reptiles here on the My Generation podcast.